The Great Awakening, Unraveling, Humanity's Most Mysterious, 150,000-Year Silence, Chapter 1, The Enigma That Haunts Our Species. Picture this. You're standing in a museum, staring at a reconstructed face from 200,000 years ago. The eyes looking back at you are unmistakably human. Not the heavy brow of a distant ancestor, but features that could belong to someone you might pass on the street today. This is Homo sapiens, your direct ancestor, as physically and mentally equipped as you are, yet separated by an ocean of time that conceals one of the most perplexing mysteries in human history. Here's what will keep you awake at night for an incomprehensible 150,000 years. These humans, our humans, lived in what archaeologists call the Great Silence. No cave paintings adorned their walls. No musical instruments echoed through their camps. No elaborate burial rituals honored their dead. No symbolic jewelry adorned their bodies. They survived. They thrived. They spread across continents, but they left behind no trace of the spark that we consider quintessentially human. And then, like a thunderclap in archaeological time, everything changed. Around 50,000 years ago, humanity exploded into consciousness. Suddenly, deep in the belly of caves, artists were creating masterpieces that would rival modern works. Craftsmen were fashioning intricate jewelry from shells and bones. Hunters were developing sophisticated strategies that required abstract thinking and complex communication. Sailors were embarking on journeys to islands beyond the horizon, guided by nothing but stars and intuition. This transformation was so dramatic, so sudden, that it's been dubbed the Great Leap Forward or the Cultural Revolution. But here's the question that has tormented scientists for decades. Why did it take so long? What invisible barrier held back the human spirit for millennia? And what finally shattered it? The answer, as we'll discover, is far more complex and fascinating than anyone imagined, a story that will fundamentally change how you understand not just human evolution, but the very nature of consciousness, culture, and what it means to be human. Chapter 2. The Gene That Promised Everything. In the late 1990s, geneticists thought they had found the holy grail of human evolution. Deep within our DNA, they discovered a gene with the mysterious designation FOXP2, a genetic sequence that seemed to hold the key to everything that makes us uniquely human. The discovery began with a tragic family story. In London, researchers encountered a family plagued by severe speech and language disorders that passed from generation to generation. Children in this family struggled to form words, to understand grammar, to communicate in ways that came naturally to others. When scientists finally traced the cause, they found it a mutation in the FOXP2 gene. This wasn't just any gene. FOXP2 was revealed to be a master regulator controlling the activity of dozens of other genes involved in brain development, neural connections, and the intricate machinery of human communication. It was as if scientists had discovered the conductor of an orchestra, the central command that orchestrated the symphony of human consciousness. The implications were staggering. Could this single gene be responsible for the sudden emergence of language art and symbolic thought 50,000 years ago? Had a crucial mutation in FOXP2 suddenly switched on modern human behavior, transforming our ancestors from survival-focused hunter-gatherers into the creative meaning-making beings we recognize today? For nearly a decade, FOXP2 was hailed as the language gene, the evolutionary smoking gun that explained humanity's great leap forward. Scientific papers proclaimed it the key to understanding human uniqueness. Popular science books declared it the gene that made us human. But science, like all great stories, loves a plot twist. In 2007, a team of researchers led by Svante Pääbo made a discovery that would shatter this elegant theory. Using cutting-edge techniques to extract and sequence DNA from ancient bones, they accomplished what had seemed impossible. They read the genetic code of our extinct cousins, the Neanderthals. What they found was shocking. The Neanderthals possessed the exact same version of FOXP2 as modern humans. Every crucial sequence, every important mutation, identical. If FOXP2 was the key to human consciousness, then Neanderthals should have experienced their own cultural revolution thousands of years before us. The language gene theory didn't just lose its luster, it crumbled entirely. Scientists realized they had been chasing a genetic ghost, a simple explanation for a phenomenon that was anything but simple. The mystery of human consciousness was about to get much more complicated. Chapter 3: Rewriting the Timeline. Africa's Hidden Treasures. While geneticists were grappling with the collapse of the FOXP2 theory, archaeologists were making discoveries that would revolutionize our understanding of human development. These weren't discoveries in the well-explored caves of Europe, but in the remote reaches of South Africa, where patient excavation was revealing secrets that had been buried for millennia. At Blombos Cave, perched on the dramatic cliffs of South Africa's southern coast, archaeologist Christopher Henshelwood and his team were uncovering evidence that would rewrite the human story. Deep in the cave's stratified layers, they found pieces of red ochre, not just any ochre, but pieces that bore unmistakable signs of intentional engraving. The patterns were mesmerizing, intricate, cross-hatched designs that required planning skill and abstract thinking. These weren't random scratches or accidental marks. They were deliberate, symbolic, purposeful. And they were old, impossibly old. Dating techniques revealed them to be approximately 100,000 years old, twice as ancient as the supposed revolution in human consciousness. But the ochre was just the beginning. The team also discovered perfectly drilled shell beads, their holes too precise and uniform to be natural. These weren't tools for survival, they were ornaments, symbols of status, beauty, or meaning. Someone had carefully selected these shells, transported them from the coast, and painstakingly crafted them into jewelry. This was symbolic behavior, artistic expression, the kind of abstract thinking that supposedly didn't exist until 50,000 years ago. Nearby at Pinnacle Point, another team was uncovering evidence of sophisticated technological behavior dating back an astounding 164,000 years. Here, ancient humans were using fire not just for warmth and cooking, but as a precision tool for crafting better stone implements. They were harvesting shellfish with knowledge of tidal patterns and seasonal variations. They were demonstrating the kind of environmental awareness and forward planning that requires complex cognitive abilities. The discoveries continued to pour in from across the African continent. At Deep Kloof Rock Shelter, archaeologists found ostrich eggshells decorated with geometric patterns, portable art that was carried across the landscape. At Sibudu Cave, they discovered evidence of sophisticated bedding composite tools made with plant-based adhesives, and the systematic use of ochre for purposes that went far beyond mere survival. Each discovery was like a piece of a vast puzzle falling into place, revealing a picture that contradicted everything scientists thought they knew about human development. The Great Leap Forward wasn't the beginning of human consciousness. It was merely the moment when this consciousness became visible in the archaeological record of Europe. The implications were profound. Modern human behavior hadn't appeared suddenly. 50,000 years ago, it had been developing slowly, incrementally, over tens of thousands of years. The revolution that scientists had identified was actually an evolution, a gradual awakening of human consciousness that had been building for millennia. Chapter 4. The European Bias. Why we missed the truth. To understand why the scientific community got the story so wrong for so long, we need to travel back to the birth of archaeology itself. Picture the scene, 19th century Europe, a time of imperial expansion and scientific revolution. Gentlemen scholars, armed with shovels and an insatiable curiosity about the past, began excavating the caves and rock shelters of France, Spain, and Germany. What they found amazed them. The caves of Lascaux and Altamira revealed paintings of breathtaking beauty and sophistication. The rock shelters of Germany yielded intricate carved figurines. The archaeological sites of France produced evidence of complex tool-making and symbolic behavior, all of it dated to approximately 40,000 to 50,000 years ago. This timing seemed to tell a clear story. Modern human behavior had exploded onto the scene around 50,000 years ago, coinciding with the arrival of Homo sapiens in Europe. It was a clean, dramatic narrative that captured the imagination of scientists and the public alike. But there was a fundamental flaw in this reasoning, one that would take decades to recognize. The European archaeological record wasn't showing the birth of human consciousness. It was showing its arrival in Europe. The difference is crucial, and it illustrates one of the most persistent biases in scientific research. Archaeology, like many fields, was shaped by its origins. European researchers naturally began their investigations close to home in the caves and sites of their own continent. When they found evidence of advanced human behavior dating to 50,000 years ago, they assumed they were witnessing the dawn of human consciousness. What they were actually witnessing was the migration of already conscious humans into a new territory. It's a classic case of mistaking correlation for causation. The archaeological evidence in Europe did indeed show a sudden appearance of modern human behavior, but this wasn't because humans had suddenly become modern. It was because modern humans had suddenly arrived in Europe. The bias was further reinforced by the practical realities of archaeological research. Europe had well-funded universities, established museums, and a long tradition of scientific investigation. Africa, meanwhile, was viewed through the lens of colonialism, often dismissed as a continent without history or significant archaeological potential. This Eurocentric perspective dominated archaeological thinking for over a century. Textbooks taught that human consciousness had emerged in Europe. Museums displayed European artifacts as the earliest examples of human creativity. Scientific papers reinforced the narrative of a 50,000-year-old revolution. It was only when archaeologists began to seriously investigate African sites in the late 20th century that the true picture began to emerge. Africa wasn't just the birthplace of human anatomy, it was also the birthplace of human consciousness. The behaviors that had seemed so revolutionary in Europe had actually been developing for millennia in Africa. The lesson is profound. Sometimes The most important discoveries aren't about finding new evidence, but about recognizing the biases that have shaped our interpretation of existing evidence. The story of human consciousness had to be rewritten, not because we found new facts, but because we finally looked in the right places. Chapter 5. We were never alone, the other humans. Perhaps the most humbling realization in modern archaeology is that for most of our species' existence, we were never alone. The world was populated by multiple human species, each with their own tools, their own cultures, their own ways of understanding the world. The story of human consciousness isn't just about Homo sapiens. It's about an entire family of thinking beings, most of whom have vanished into the mists of time. The Neanderthals, our misunderstood cousins. For over a century, Neanderthals were portrayed as the brutish, primitive cousins of modern humans. Popular culture depicted them as grunting cavemen, barely more intelligent than the beasts they hunted. This image was so pervasive that Neanderthal became synonymous with stupidity and backwardness. But modern archaeology has revealed a dramatically different picture. Neanderthals were sophisticated beings with complex technologies, rich cultural traditions, and possibly even spiritual beliefs. They first appeared around 400,000 years ago and spread across Europe and Western Asia, adapting to environments from Mediterranean coasts to Arctic tundra. Their tool-making abilities were extraordinary. The Mysterian toolkit associated with Neanderthals shows a level of sophistication that rivals early modern human technologies. They crafted different tools for different purposes, adapted their techniques to local materials, and passed their knowledge down through generations. At sites like Schöningen in Germany, they created wooden spears of such precision and balance that they could have been used for hunting large game at considerable distances. But, perhaps most remarkably, Neanderthals were chemists. At sites across Europe, archaeologists have found evidence that they used manganese dioxide, a naturally occurring black powder, to improve their fire-making abilities. This wasn't instinctive behavior. It was scientific observation and experimentation. They had discovered that this mineral could lower the ignition temperature of wood, making fire starting more reliable in damp conditions. The evidence for Neanderthal burial practices is equally compelling. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, archaeologist Ralph Solecki discovered Neanderthal skeletons that had been carefully placed in graves, some accompanied by flower pollen that suggested ritual mourning. While the interpretation of these burials remains debated, they hint at emotional depth and symbolic thinking that goes far beyond mere survival. Even more astounding is the evidence for Neanderthal art. At La Pasiega Cave in Spain, red ochre paintings on cave walls have been dated to over 64,000 years ago, long before modern humans arrived in Europe. These aren't random marks or accidental stains. They're deliberate applications of pigment in symbolic patterns, clear evidence of artistic expression. Perhaps the most mysterious Neanderthal site is Bruniquel Cave in France, deep underground, over 300 meters from the cave entrance. Archaeologists discovered ring-shaped structures made from hundreds of broken stalagmites. These weren't natural formations, they were deliberately constructed by Neanderthals nearly 176,000 years ago. The effort required to build these structures in complete darkness, so far from the cave entrance, suggests planning and purpose that we can barely comprehend. The Denisovans, ghosts in our genes. In 2010, a tiny fragment of a pinky bone from a young girl revolutionized our understanding of human evolution. Found in Denisova Cave in Russia's Altai Mountains, this bone contained DNA that didn't match any known human species. The girl wasn't a Neanderthal or a modern human. She was something else entirely. The Denisovans, as they came to be known, remain one of the most enigmatic branches of the human family tree. We have almost no physical remains, just a few teeth, some bone fragments, and that precious pinky bone. But their DNA tells a remarkable story of a species that was anything but primitive. Genetic analysis reveals that Denisovans interbred with both Neanderthals and modern humans. Their genetic legacy survives today, primarily in Melanesian and Australian Aboriginal populations, who carry up to 4% Denisovan DNA. This genetic inheritance isn't just historical curiosity, it's functional. Denisovan genes help modern Tibetans survive at high altitudes, providing crucial adaptations for life in oxygen-poor environments. But the most remarkable Denisovan artifact isn't genetic. It's a bracelet, found in the same cave layers as the pinky bone. This green chlorolite bracelet dates to at least 40,000 years ago. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. The bracelet has been drilled with precision holes and polished to a lustrous shine. It represents a level of artistic sophistication that rivals the finest work of early modern humans. This single artifact challenges everything we thought we knew about human cognitive evolution. If Denisovans were capable of such fine craftsmanship, what else were they capable of? What cultures, what technologies, what forms of consciousness have been lost to time? Homo erectus, the long success story. Among all human species, none had a longer or more successful run than Homo erectus. First appearing nearly 2 million years ago, they persisted until at least 100,000 years ago, a span of time that dwarfs the entire existence of our own species. In evolutionary terms, they were the true champions of the human lineage. Homo erectus was a species of firsts. They were the first humans to leave Africa, spreading across Asia, and establishing populations from the Caucasus to Indonesia. They were the first to use fire regularly, transforming not just their technology, but their biology. Cooked food is easier to digest and more calorie-dense than raw food, likely fueling the brain growth that characterized later human evolution. But the most remarkable Homo erectus discovery came from Java in 2014. Archaeologist Josephine Jordans and her team were examining freshwater mussel shells from the Traineal site when they noticed something extraordinary. One shell dating to approximately 500,000 years ago bore a series of deliberately engraved zigzag lines. This wasn't random damage or natural wear. The lines were precisely made, requiring careful planning and steady hands. They represent the earliest known example of abstract patterning by any human ancestor, a cognitive signature that speaks to a mind capable of symbolic thought. The implications are staggering. 500,000 years ago, a Homo erectus individual sat by a riverbank, picked up a sharp stone, and carefully engraved patterns onto a shell. Not for survival, not for function, but for some purpose. We can only imagine. Perhaps it was art. Perhaps it was a form of communication. Perhaps it was simply the pleasure of creating something beautiful. The hobbits and the Naledi, expanding the family. The human family tree became even more complex with the discovery of Homo floresiensis on the Indonesian island of Flores. Dubbed hobbits for their diminutive stature, standing only about 3 feet tall, these humans lived as recently as 50,000 years ago. Despite their small brains, they created sophisticated stone tools and hunted large animals in complex island ecosystems. Even more mysterious is Homo naledi, discovered in South Africa's Rising Star Cave system. With brains the size of oranges, these humans nonetheless appear to have engaged in deliberate burial practices over 200,000 years ago. They navigated treacherous cave passages to deposit their dead in remote chambers, behavior that suggests symbolic thinking and possibly even ritual beliefs. Chapter 6. The Numbers Game. Why Population Matters. As evidence mounted that multiple human species possessed sophisticated cognitive abilities, a new question emerged. If all these humans were so capable, why didn't we see evidence of complex culture much earlier? Why was there such a long gap between the first appearance of symbolic thinking and the explosion of cultural expression that occurred around 50,000 years ago? The answer lies not in the limitations of the human mind, but in the mathematics of cultural transmission. Even the most brilliant innovations are worthless if they can't be passed on to future generations. And for ideas to survive and evolve, they need something precious other people, the fragility of knowledge. Imagine a small group of early humans camping by a river. One individual, let's call him Kale, discovers a new technique for making stone tools, a method that produces sharper edges with less effort. It's a revolutionary innovation that could transform the lives of his people. But Kyle is the only one who knows the technique, and he's getting old. If Kyle dies before he can fully teach the method to others, his discovery dies with him. No matter how groundbreaking his innovation was, it becomes just another lost opportunity in the vast sweep of human history. This is the cruel mathematics of cultural transmission. Knowledge without continuity is meaningless. This phenomenon known as cultural drift is particularly devastating in small populations. When groups are tiny and isolated, the loss of even a single knowledgeable individual can erase generations of accumulated wisdom. Languages fragment, traditions fade, and hard-won innovations vanish into oblivion. The bottleneck years. For most of early human history, our species lived perpetually on the edge of extinction. Genetic studies suggest that during certain periods, the total number of breeding Homo sapiens individuals worldwide may have dropped as low as 1,000 to 10,000. To put this in perspective, that's fewer people than attend a typical concert scattered across entire continents. These numbers weren't static. They fluctuated with climate changes, natural disasters, and ecological pressures. Around 74,000 years ago, the Toba supervolcano eruption in Indonesia may have reduced the global human population to fewer than 10,000 individuals. We came terrifyingly close to extinction, closer than most people realize. When populations are this small, cultural innovation becomes nearly impossible. There simply aren't enough people to maintain and build upon accumulated knowledge. Ideas that might have flourished in larger populations die out before they can take root. The potential for cultural complexity exists, but the social infrastructure to support it does not. The tipping point. But then, something changed. Around 60,000 to 50,000 years ago, human populations began to grow. Climate conditions stabilized in some regions, making life more predictable and resources more abundant. Most importantly, humans began to cluster in areas where groups could interact regularly along coastlines, river valleys, and other resource-rich environments. This wasn't just numerical growth. It was social transformation. For the first time in human history, ideas could spread beyond their original inventors. A new tool design created by one group could be adopted and improved by another. Stories and songs could travel from camp to camp, growing richer and more complex with each telling. The effect was exponential. As populations grew and connected, the rate of cultural innovation accelerated. Ideas that had once vanished with their creators began to accumulate, building upon each other in an ever-expanding web of human knowledge and creativity. The network effect. Modern network theory helps us understand what happened during this crucial period. When small groups are isolated, innovation is limited by the cognitive capacity of individuals. But when groups begin to connect, something magical happens. The collective intelligence of the network begins to exceed the sum of its parts. This is exactly what anthropologists Adam Powell, Stephen Shannon, and Mark Thomas argued in their groundbreaking 2009 paper on demography and human cultural evolution. They demonstrated that the sudden appearance of complex culture around 50,000 years ago wasn't the result of cognitive evolution. It was the result of demographic evolution. The human brain hadn't suddenly become more capable. Human society had suddenly become more connected. The spark of consciousness that had been flickering in isolated groups for millennia finally had the fuel it needed to ignite into the roaring fire of human culture. Chapter 7. The Branching Tree of Human Evolution. One of the most persistent myths about human evolution is the image of linear progression, the famous march of progress that shows a stooped ape gradually transforming into an upright human. This image, while compelling, is fundamentally wrong. Evolution doesn't work like a ladder. It works like a tree with multiple branches growing, intertwining, and sometimes breaking off entirely. Beyond the ladder metaphor suggests that each species is an improvement over the last, with Homo sapiens as the inevitable pinnacle of evolutionary progress. This view is not only scientifically incorrect, but also dangerous. It implies that some humans are more evolved than others, a notion that has been used to justify terrible injustices throughout history. The reality is far more complex and interesting. Human evolution resembles a skill tree in a video game with multiple paths leading to different specializations. Some species developed exceptional tool-making abilities, but didn't spread far geographically. Others expanded widely, but faced extinction when conditions changed. Each branch of the human family tree represents a different solution to the challenge of survival, and none is inherently superior to the others. The Neanderthal path. Consider the Neanderthals again. They weren't a failed version of modern humans. They were perfectly adapted to their environment. Their stocky build, large brains, and robust physiology made them ideally suited to the Ice Age conditions of Europe. They developed sophisticated hunting techniques for large game, created effective cold weather clothing, and built social structures that allowed them to survive in some of the harshest conditions on Earth. If climate change hadn't ended the Ice Age, or if modern humans hadn't migrated into their territory, Neanderthals might still be thriving today. We might share our world with another intelligent species, each with their own cultures, their own perspectives on existence, their own contributions to the sum of human knowledge. The island experiments, the Indonesian archipelago, provides a particularly fascinating example of evolutionary experimentation. Here, isolated populations developed along dramatically different trajectories. Homo floresiensis on Flores Island evolved into a diminutive form, perfectly adapted to their resource-limited environment. Despite their small stature and brain size, they created sophisticated stone tools and successfully hunted large animals. Meanwhile, on nearby Java, Homo erectus populations persisted for over 1 million years, developing their own unique cultural traditions and technologies. Each island became a laboratory for human evolution, producing different solutions to the challenges of survival. The mixing and matching. Perhaps most remarkably, these different human species didn't just coexist, they interbred. Modern genetic analysis reveals that human evolution was not a simple branching process, but a complex network of connections. Homo sapiens interbred with Neanderthals, with Denisovans, and possibly with other species whose genetic signatures we haven't yet identified. This genetic mixing wasn't incidental. It was functionally important. The Neanderthal genes that persist in modern European and Asian populations provide advantages in immune function and adaptation to non-African environments. The Denisovan genes in Tibetan populations enable survival at high altitudes. We carry the evolutionary solutions of our extinct cousins in our very cells. The survivors in this complex web of human evolution. Homo sapiens emerged not as the most intelligent or most capable species, but as the most adaptable and, crucially, the most connected. We weren't necessarily smarter than Neanderthals or more creative than Denisovans. We were simply more numerous, more mobile, and more willing to share information across group boundaries. Our survival wasn't inevitable. It was contingent. A slightly different climate pattern, a different timing of volcanic eruptions, or a different pattern of disease outbreaks could have led to a world dominated by Neanderthals, or some other human species. We are the survivors of a complex evolutionary lottery, not the predetermined winners of an evolutionary race. Chapter 8: The Great Convergence. When everything changed. Around 50,000 years ago, something unprecedented happened in human history. After millennia of gradual development, scattered innovations, and isolated cultural experiments, humanity experienced what we might call the Great Convergence, a moment when all the elements necessary for complex culture finally came together. The perfect storm. The Great Convergence wasn't a single event, but a constellation of factors that aligned in just the right way. Climate conditions had stabilized after the chaos of the Ice Age fluctuations. Human populations had grown large enough to support sustained cultural transmission. Migration patterns had increased contact between different groups. And perhaps most importantly, the cognitive foundations for symbolic thinking had been thoroughly established through millennia of gradual development. It was like a perfect storm, but instead of destruction, it brought creation. The archaeological record from this period explodes with evidence of human creativity and innovation. Cave paintings appear simultaneously across multiple continents. Musical instruments emerge from archaeological sites separated by thousands of miles. Sophisticated hunting technologies spread rapidly through human populations. The art revolution. The artistic explosion that occurred during this period is perhaps the most visible sign of the Great Convergence. In caves across Europe, artists created works of stunning beauty and sophistication. The paintings at Lascaux, Altamira, and Chauvet represent not just artistic achievement, but cognitive revolution. These artists could envision creatures that weren't present, manipulate space and perspective, and create symbolic representations that conveyed complex meanings. But the art wasn't limited to cave paintings. Humans began creating portable art, carved figurines, decorated tools, and ornamental objects that could be carried from place to place. The famous Venus figurines found across Europe represent standardized artistic traditions that spread across vast distances, suggesting shared cultural meanings and sophisticated communication networks. The technology explosion. Alongside artistic innovation came technological revolution. The period around 50,000 years ago saw the development of composite tools, implements made from multiple materials working together. Spear throwers appeared, multiplying the effectiveness of hunters. Fishing equipment became more sophisticated, opening up new food sources. Sewing needles enabled the creation of fitted clothing, allowing humans to survive in even harsher climates. Perhaps most remarkably, humans began to undertake long-distance sea voyages. The settlement of Australia, which required crossing at least 50 miles of open ocean, represents one of the most extraordinary achievements in human history. These weren't accidental voyages. They required planning navigation skills and the ability to coordinate group efforts toward a distant goal. The social revolution, the great convergence, also transformed human social organization. Evidence from this period suggests the development of more complex social hierarchies, specialized roles within groups, and extensive trade networks. Rare materials like obsidian and amber appear in archaeological sites hundreds of miles from their sources, indicating sophisticated exchange systems. Perhaps most importantly, humans began to develop what anthropologists call institutional memory, the ability to preserve and transmit knowledge across generations through formal and informal cultural institutions. Stories, songs, and rituals began to serve as repositories of crucial information about everything from seasonal patterns to moral codes. The cognitive substrate. It's crucial to understand that the Great Convergence didn't create human intelligence. It unleashed it. The cognitive foundations for all these achievements had been building for millennia. The capacity for symbolic thinking, artistic expression, and complex problem-solving had been present in human populations for tens of thousands of years. What changed wasn't the hardware of human cognition, but the software of human culture. For the first time in human history, innovations could spread rapidly, build upon each other, and accumulate into increasingly sophisticated cultural systems. The individual human mind remained the same, but the collective human mind had been born. Chapter 9. The Deep Echoes, What We Inherited. As we piece together the story of human consciousness, one profound truth emerges. We are not self-made. The achievements we celebrate as uniquely human art music, symbolic thinking, complex technology, are not innovations of our species alone. They are inheritances from a deep and complex evolutionary history that includes multiple human species, each contributing their own pieces to the puzzle of human consciousness. The genetic inheritance. Modern genetic analysis reveals that we carry the literal legacy of our extinct cousins in our DNA. The 1-4% of Neanderthal DNA found in non-African populations isn't just evolutionary trivia, it's functional inheritance. These genetic sequences provide advantages in immune function, help us adapt to non-African environments, and may even influence aspects of our cognitive abilities. The Denisovan genes found in Melanesian and Tibetan populations tell a similar story. These genetic sequences inherited from a species we know almost nothing about provide crucial adaptations for life at high altitudes and in challenging environments. We are quite literally the products of multiple human species carrying their solutions to survival challenges in our very cells. The cultural inheritance. But our inheritance goes beyond genetics. The behaviors that define us as human, our tendency to create art, to bury our dead with ceremony, to tell stories that explain our place in the cosmos, may be echoes of practices that began long before Homo sapiens existed. When a modern human stands before a cave painting, feeling moved by its beauty and mystery, are they experiencing something uniquely human, or are they participating in a tradition that began with Neanderthal artists 64,000 years ago, when we craft jewelry or create musical instruments? Are we expressing purely human creativity, or are we continuing practices that Denisovans and other extinct species also enjoyed? The technological inheritance. Our technological achievements, too, build upon foundations laid by other human species. The use of fire, the creation of stone tools, the development of hunting strategies, all of these were perfected by Homo erectus and other early humans millions of years before Homo sapiens appeared. Even our most sophisticated technologies can be traced back to innovations made by other human species. The composite tools that enabled the Great Convergence were built upon techniques first developed by Neanderthals. The navigation skills that allowed the settlement of Australia may have been refined from methods first used by Homo erectus in their migrations across Asia. The cognitive inheritance. Perhaps most profoundly, we may have inherited aspects of consciousness itself from our extinct relatives. The capacity for symbolic thinking, the ability to create abstract patterns, the tendency to seek meaning in the world around us. These may not be uniquely human traits, but shared characteristics of the human family. When we engage in spiritual practices, when we create art, when we tell stories that help us make sense of existence, we may be participating in traditions that stretch back hundreds of thousands of years. The human consciousness that we celebrate as our unique achievement may actually be a collective inheritance from multiple species, each contributing their own pieces to the complex puzzle of what it means to be human. The humbling truth. This inheritance is both humbling and inspiring. It reminds us that we are not the pinnacle of evolution, but one branch of a complex tree. We are not self-made, but the products of a deep evolutionary history that includes many species, most of whom have vanished from the earth. At the same time, this inheritance connects us to a vast community of consciousness. that extends far beyond our own species. We are part of a tradition of thinking beings that stretches back millions of years. When we create art, solve problems, or contemplate our place in the universe, we are participating in activities that have been central to the human experience for far longer than our species has existed. Chapter 10: The Continuing Evolution, What We Are Still Becoming. The story of human consciousness is far from over. While we often think of evolution as something that happened in the distant past, the truth is that human evolution, both biological and cultural, continues today. We are not the final product of evolutionary development, but a species still in the process of becoming. The accelerating pace. If anything, human evolution has accelerated dramatically in recent millennia. The development of agriculture-riding cities and global communication networks has created selective pressures that are reshaping our species in real time. We are not just studying human evolution, we are living it. The changes are both subtle and profound. Studies of human populations show ongoing genetic adaptation to new environments and lifestyles. The ability to digest milk into adulthood, resistance to certain diseases and adaptations to high-altitude living have all evolved within the last 10,000 years. We are still adapting, still evolving, still becoming. The cultural acceleration, but perhaps more dramatically, human cultural evolution has reached unprecedented speeds. The same processes that drove the Great Convergence 50,000 years ago are now operating on a global scale, with innovations spreading around the world in hours rather than millennia. The Internet, global communication networks, and mass media have created a planetary nervous system that allows ideas to evolve and spread at speeds that would have been incomprehensible to our ancestors. We are witnessing cultural evolution in real time as memes, technologies, and social innovations spread and mutate across human populations. The technological inheritance. Our relationship with technology is becoming increasingly intimate. We carry powerful computers in our pockets, access the sum of human knowledge with a few keystrokes, and augment our cognitive abilities with artificial intelligence. In some sense, we are becoming cyborgs, not in the science fiction sense of mechanical implants, but in the deeper sense of extending our consciousness through technological tools. This technological evolution is not separate from biological evolution, but intertwined with it. Our tools are reshaping our brains, our social structures, and possibly even our genetic future. We are co-evolving with our technologies in ways that will fundamentally alter what it means to be human. The questions ahead. As we stand at this pivotal moment in human history, we face questions that our ancestors could never have imagined. Will artificial intelligence augment human consciousness or replace it? Will genetic engineering allow us to direct our own evolution? Will we spread beyond Earth, carrying human consciousness to other worlds? These aren't just technological questions, they're evolutionary questions. They ask us to consider what aspects of human nature are essential and what aspects are contingent. They force us to grapple with the deepest questions about consciousness, identity, and the future of our species. The continuing mystery. Despite all our advances in archaeology, genetics, and neuroscience, the mystery of human consciousness remains largely unsolved. We can trace its development map, its neural correlates, and study its cultural expressions. But the fundamental question, what it is like to be conscious, remains as puzzling as ever. Perhaps this is as it should be. The mystery of consciousness may be one of those questions that deepens rather than resolves as we learn more. Each discovery about the nature of human awareness opens up new puzzles, new avenues of investigation, new ways of understanding what it means to be a thinking being in a vast and mysterious universe. Chapter 11. The Lessons of Deep Time. As our journey through the deep history of human consciousness draws toward its close, it's worth reflecting on what this story teaches us about ourselves, our place in the world, and our responsibilities to the future. The lesson of humility. Perhaps the most important lesson from this exploration is humility. The story of human consciousness is not a tale of inevitable progress or divine destiny. It's a story of contingency luck and the complex interplay of countless factors that could have unfolded differently at any moment. We are not the chosen species, the inevitable outcome of evolutionary progress or the pinnacle of natural development. We are one branch of a complex tree, survivors of an evolutionary lottery that eliminated many other intelligent species. Our consciousness is not a unique gift, but an inheritance from a deep evolutionary history that includes many minds, most of whom are now silent. This humility should inform how we see ourselves and how we treat other forms of life. If consciousness can emerge in multiple species, if intelligence can take many forms, then we must be open to the possibility that awareness exists in ways we don't yet understand or recognize. The lesson of connectivity. The story of the Great Convergence teaches us that consciousness is not just individual, but collective. The explosion of human culture 50,000 years ago wasn't the result of smarter individuals, but of better connections between individuals. Innovation emerges not from isolated genius, but from networks of communication and exchange. This lesson is particularly relevant in our current era of global connectivity. The challenges we face, climate change, pandemic disease, technological disruption, require not just individual intelligence, but collective wisdom. The same principles that enabled the emergence of human culture can guide us towards solutions to our most pressing problems. The lesson of continuity. Despite the dramatic changes in human history, there are deep continuities that connect us to our earliest ancestors. The impulse to create art, to seek meaning, to care for our dead, to wonder about our place in the cosmos, these seem to be fundamental aspects of human consciousness that have persisted across hundreds of thousands of years. Understanding these continuities can help us navigate the rapid changes of the modern world. While our technologies evolve at breakneck speed, our fundamental human needs and drives remain remarkably consistent. We still need community meaning, beauty, and connection, the same things that drove our ancestors to paint in caves and tell stories around fires. The lesson of responsibility. Finally, the story of human consciousness teaches us about responsibility. We are the inheritors of a vast legacy of innovation, creativity, and wisdom that stretches back hundreds of thousands of years. This inheritance comes with obligations to preserve and extend human knowledge, to care for the planet that nurtured consciousness, and to ensure that the flame of awareness continues to burn in future generations. We are also responsible for the other forms of life with which we share the planet. If consciousness can emerge in multiple species, if intelligence can take many forms, then we have a duty to protect and nurture the conditions that allow awareness to flourish in all its manifestations. Chapter 12. The Eternal Questions. As we conclude this exploration of human consciousness, we find ourselves facing the same fundamental questions that have puzzled humans for millennia. Who are we? Where did we come from? What makes us unique? What is our purpose in the vast cosmos? The question of uniqueness. The discovery that multiple human species possessed sophisticated cognitive abilities forces us to reconsider what makes us unique. If Neanderthals created art, if Denisovans crafted jewelry, if Homo erectus engaged in symbolic thinking, then what, if anything, distinguishes Homo sapiens? Perhaps our uniqueness lies not in any single cognitive ability, but in our capacity for connection and accumulation. We may not be smarter than our extinct cousins, but we have proven more adept at building upon the innovations of others, creating cumulative cultural traditions that grow more sophisticated over time. Or perhaps our uniqueness is more contingent than essential. We may be unique simply because we are the only human species that survived to tell the story. In a different world, with different evolutionary pressures, the question of human uniqueness might be posed by Neanderthal philosophers, or Denisovan scientists. The question of consciousness, the mystery of consciousness itself, remains largely unsolved. We can map its neural correlates, trace its evolutionary development, and study its cultural expressions. But the fundamental question, what it is like to experience awareness, remains as puzzling as ever. This mystery is not just scientific, but philosophical. It asks us to consider the relationship between mind and matter, between subjective experience and objective reality. It challenges us to understand how complexity can give rise to consciousness, how matter can become aware of itself. The question of meaning. Perhaps most fundamentally, the story of human consciousness raises questions about meaning and purpose. If consciousness emerged through natural processes, if our sense of meaning is a product of evolutionary development, does this diminish its significance? The answer, paradoxically, may be no. The fact that consciousness emerged naturally doesn't make it less meaningful. It makes it more remarkable. The universe has given rise to beings capable of contemplating their own existence, of creating beauty, of asking profound questions about reality itself. This is perhaps the most extraordinary fact in the known cosmos, the question of future. Finally, the story of human consciousness asks us to consider the future. What will consciousness become? Will it remain confined to biological brains, or will it emerge in artificial systems? Will it spread beyond Earth, carrying awareness to other worlds? Will it evolve into forms we cannot currently imagine? These questions are not just speculative, they are urgent. The choices we make in the coming decades will profoundly shape the future of consciousness in the universe. We have the power to nurture or destroy the conditions that allow awareness to flourish. We can ensure that the flame of consciousness continues to burn, or we can extinguish it forever. Epilogue. The continuing story. The story we have told is not complete. It cannot be complete because it is still being written. Every day, archaeologists uncover new evidence about our past. Geneticists decode new secrets hidden in our DNA. Neuroscientists make new discoveries about the nature of consciousness itself. More importantly, every day, we add new chapters to the story of human consciousness. Every work of art created, every scientific discovery made, every act of compassion performed adds to the vast legacy of human awareness. We are not just studying consciousness. We are consciousness experiencing itself, questioning itself, seeking to understand itself. The mystery that began 200,000 years ago continues today. The questions that puzzled our earliest ancestors still puzzle us. The wonder that drove humans to paint in caves still drives us to explore the cosmos. The consciousness that emerged slowly over millennia continues to evolve, continues to surprise us, continues to reveal new depths and possibilities. In the end, perhaps the most remarkable thing about human consciousness is not where it came from, but where it might go. We are part of a story that began in the depths of evolutionary time and stretches toward an unimaginable future. We are conscious beings, contemplating consciousness minds, seeking to understand, mind awareness becoming aware of itself. This is our inheritance, our responsibility, and our gift to the future. The story of human consciousness is not just history, it is destiny, unfolding with each passing moment, shaped by our choices, guided by our dreams, carried forward by the same spark of awareness that first flickered in the minds of our ancient ancestors and continues to burn brightly in us today. The Great Awakening that began 50,000 years ago is not over. It has only just begun. We are still awakening, still discovering what it means to be conscious, still writing the next chapters. In the greatest story ever told, the story of mind emerging from matter of awareness, arising from the cosmos of the universe, coming to know itself through us. What happens next is up to us. The flame of consciousness burns in our hands now, and it is our responsibility to ensure that it continues to illuminate the darkness, to create beauty, to seek truth, and to kindle new flames of awareness wherever consciousness might take root in the vast garden of the cosmos. The mystery continues. The story goes on, and we, inheritors of the dreams of countless generations, carriers of the spark of consciousness, questioners of the deepest mysteries, we get to help write what comes next. Word count approximately 10,000 words.